it will not be an after lunch nap time story. Hopefully it will keep you engaged. So Virginia Woolf writes in A Room of One's Own, quote, "For we think back through our mothers if we are women. It is useless to go to the great men writers for help," end quote. These sentences initiate a generative project of second wave feminism, the creation by feminist authors, critics, scholars of a canon of women's literature. From our current vantage point in feminism's third wave, it becomes possible to revisit this project of canon formation, and that's really where my scholarship begins. My research suggests that Woolf is a creative mother of the women who follow her. Broadly, Woolf uses three archetypes in her fiction to model options for womanhood: the angel, the artist, and the girl. These archetypes persist into the 21st century, creating a language through which women continue to describe the roles available to them. Today, I'll explain Woolf's archetypes for female identity and then trace their appearance in contemporary fiction by women writers. To conclude, I connect this analysis to women's art and activism in mainstream culture today. An investigation of Woolf's female archetypes and their ongoing persistence in literature and culture helps readers, both professional readers like me and everyday common readers, which were a big interest of Woolf's, to understand how gender shapes women's social and cultural contributions, as well as how the value of those cultural contributions is judged. So to begin, I want to talk about the angel in the house. The angel in the house is a figure that Woolf appropriates from the 19th century poem by Coventry Patmore, and it's likely Woolf's most powerful and pervasive fictional image for womanhood. Symbolizing an ideal of submissive femininity that compromises women's full participation in political, social, and cultural life, the angel gets her power from her complicity with oppressive, patriarchal, and heteronormative structures. For this reason, in her essay, Professions for Women, Woolf concludes that the woman writer must kill the angel in order to create. Woolf does just that over and over and over again in her fiction. Woolf's most prominent angel characters, Clarissa Dalloway, Mrs. Ramsay, and Mrs. Pargeter, do not exist as fully alive women. They embody a dying or dead ideal of femininity, an ideal that haunts women and with which they must reckon to find their own voices. Unlike Woolf, who portrays the angel as a holdover from a repressive Victorian past, feminist novels after Woolf repeatedly resurrect the angel in new guises. For instance, in Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, the angel is embodied by the commander's wife, Serena Joy, the primary antagonist to the novel's narrator and protagonist, Offred. Atwood paints Serena Joy, and this is important. She paints Serena Joy and not the commander as Offred's most dangerous enemy, combining in Serena Joy the characteristics of popular culture angel icons from the 1970s and 80s, Phyllis Schlafly and Tammy Faye Baker. From Offred's perspective, Serena Joy's fury at her own subjugation drives her desire to subjugate Offred, making Serena Joy a direct agent of the patriarchal power that oppresses her. Only by fighting the angel, even as she befriends the commander, can Offred preserve a sense of her own self-identity. Atwood brings Woolf's angel back to life, and in so doing, she enacts a narrative regression of the feminist progress that Woolf's body of work predicts. Just as Woolf returns to the archetype of the angel in order to confront and consign to history the ideals of womanhood that she inherits from the Victorian period, she uses the archetype of the artist to depict a role that promises liberation but fails to deliver it. If the angel's identity depends on embodying a patriarchally endorsed feminine ideal, the artist depends on rejecting it. In this, the artist denotes a necessary step toward empowerment and equality, but Woolf suggests that women must surpass this archetype if they want full personhood. So basically, the problem with the woman artist is she is just as defined by patriarchy as the angel is. It's just she's so busy being a monster and objecting to it that she can't sort of be a fully realized person. For women authors after Woolf, the artist role blocks women's paths towards self-actualization and embodied creativity. While readers often regard fictional artists as role models for female empowerment, the women authors who write them often see these characters as blocked, angry, and isolated, the opposite of empowered. In The Woman Upstairs, Claire Massoud's Nora Eldridge, like Woolf's artists before her, is lonely, dissatisfied, and invisible. At the novel's start, Nora thinks of the woman upstairs as a quiet, non-threatening identity. By the novel's end, Nora's articulation of the woman upstairs transforms to reveal fury, bitterness, and disappointment. Woolf positions the enraged Nora on a continuum with other women artists, including Woolf. And as you see in the second passage, when she talks about walking into the water with rocks in your pockets, that's a direct reference to Woolf, who kills herself by putting rocks in her pockets and walking into the river Ouse. So it's not a subtle allusion there. So their creativity and Nora's collapses beneath the weight of patriarchal oppression. The challenge Massoud sets for her readers in The Woman Upstairs is to envision what a woman might achieve creatively if we stop seeing her as the woman upstairs and start seeing her as a living, breathing human being. In the end, Woolf's only archetype that offers women hope of creating and living freely is the girl, the woman of the future who will benefit from the labors of the angel and the artist before her, and who will not face the constant struggle either to embody or to resist patriarchy's norms for proper femininity. Woolf and the feminist authors who follow her use the girl to experiment with possibilities for feminist narrative. 20th and 21st century feminist novels use the girl archetype to create a positive framework for female identity and creativity, a framework that can live on into the future. In The Sunlight Pilgrims, Jenny Fagan locates her girl in a near-future dystopia framed by environmental apocalypse. As with Woolf's portrayal of Cam Ramsey, Fagan's portrayal of Stella shows the girl archetype as enabling an ideal of free and authentic expression and self-actualization through telling the truth about one's own experience. Stella, a trans girl who dreams of gender confirmation surgery, feels and expresses certainty about both her present identity and her future. Her certainty is rooted in sexual, social, and intellectual desire, as well as in her deep bonds of affiliation with others. The figure of the girl, often embodied by a grown woman, does not have the power to destroy patriarchy or unilaterally to escape its punishing effects. But unlike the angel and the artist before her, the girl possesses the ingenuity to invent a space for her own growth. And she can picture new possibilities, not only for relationships between women and men, but also for relationships between women. These newly imagined affiliations predict the future of women's literature and culture in the 21st century. The girl is a recurring feminist fixture, not only in literature, but also in popular culture and everyday life. For example, we see the girl in television in shows like The Gilmore Girls, in HBO's show Girls, in movies like Clueless, Girl Fight, Legally Blonde, and The Witch, pop music, including Beyonce's self-titled album, Beyonce, Kesha's Rainbow, and Janelle Monáe's Dirty Computer, also in video games like Horizon Zero Dawn. We also see the girl present in activist movements of feminism's third wave, including the Women's March, Me Too, and Time's Up. The figure of the girl lays the foundation for conversations about autonomy, agency, desire, and consent. Through their engagement with Woolf's girl archetype, women's literature and culture participates in the project of feminism. At its best, this work, as the renowned author Roxane Gay puts it, quote, allows for hope and the possibility of a better world, even if that hope is shrouded in darkness, end quote. Thank you. You'll talk to me later. It's fine. Thanks for coming, everyone.
That's fine. We've got it under control. So last up for this format, anyway, is Perilou Goddard, who is a professor in the Department of Psychological Sciences, and she's going to talk to us about attitudes regarding heroin use disorder. And here comes your able assistant.
Oh, good. Yay. All right, that's awesome. Okay. All right. Here we go. All right, yeah, that's super.
Are you okay with the podium mic, or would you like a...
I don't need a mic at all. I got the
We're
teacher
actually
voice.
recording,
Oh, okay. All right, well, I guess okay, I don't do mics. I have a teacher voice, right? But evidently this is being recorded, so okay, I'm going to try to stand here, but it's hard. All right, so what I'm going to talk about today is a series of studies that my students and I have done addressing the opioid epidemic. You've probably seen this. This is the cover from the Pulitzer Prize-winning expose in the Cincinnati Enquirer that documented the lives of people involved in our local opioid epidemic over 1 week. And during that week, there were over 180 overdoses and 18 deaths. Nationwide, almost 116 people a day are dying from opioid overdoses. So opioid overdoses kill more people than car crashes and gun homicides combined. So it's a great big problem, and I'm sure you all know that. But it's also something that's pretty relevant to my scholarship. I have been teaching a course in drug policy since 1999. I've been studying drug policy issues for almost 30 years. But it was my students who said to me back in 2013, Dr. Goddard, you can't sit on the sidelines anymore. You need to get out of the classroom and start doing something in the community. And so over time, I've sort of taken on this role of educator at large. And I will speak to literally any group that asks me anytime. And I go out and what I see as something I can bring to the issue is that I can explain the science to people who don't have a science background. But I'm also very interested in studying how we approach the opioid epidemic we have. It's not a mystery what we should do. We have evidence from all over the world that says there are at least 3 things that could save untold thousands of lives if we would just do them. And those 3 things are to prevent overdose deaths with naloxone, that's the drug Narcan that can reverse overdose. We can prevent the spread of disease and provide a bridge to treatment with syringe services programs. Maybe you saw in the paper today that we're now having an HIV explosion. That shouldn't come as a surprise. We all knew it was coming, and we do now have syringe services programs for about 3 hours a week in each of our heavily affected counties. Yeah, so it's better than nothing. It's a whole lot better than nothing, but it's still pretty bad. And then we can also provide effective treatment, and the best treatment for opioid use disorder is medication-assisted treatment. That's treatment with methadone, or buprenorphine, or with naltrexone. And these, again, are not surprises. We have known this for a long time. All of these approaches taken together fall under the umbrella term of harm reduction. And I've been studying harm reduction for a long time. Recently, I've been studying it related directly to the opioid epidemic. And I want to know, why is it such a hard sell? And on the flip side, why do some people just see it as obvious? Why do some people easily support it and others reject it utterly? So over the last 3 years, I have worked with 6 different undergraduate students to conduct 6 studies. And just for the record, 4 of these studies were honors and psychology projects. We're really very proud of that program. And in those 6 studies, we collected data from over 600 NKU students and almost 1,900 U.S. residents who responded to online surveys through the MTurk database in Amazon. So we have data both from NKU student samples, but also from a much broader sample of people across the U.S. And the kind of research method that I'm using is called multiple regression. We measure and or manipulate a bunch of variables, and we say which of those we're going to try to explain or predict. And we define those as our criterion variables. So in all 6 of these studies, I was trying to understand what led people to support or reject medication-assisted treatment. And then in 4 of the studies, we also were trying to predict and understand attitudes toward overdose prevention and to syringe services programs. Then we need a bunch of predictor variables. We need to measure and manipulate stuff that we then plug into our big equations and let the computers hum and whir and spit out the answers that tell us which of those variables are the most important in explaining these attitude criteria that we have set up as our endpoints. And in each of these studies, we've used a variety of variables. And 5 of the 6 studies were true experiments, so we actually manipulated variables and randomly assigned people to conditions. But in all the studies, we also measured variables, things that you can't manipulate, like what somebody's political identity is. The variables were different for the different studies, but all of them included measures of perceived control. So to what extent do you believe that opioid use is within a person's control versus something they don't have control over? We also, in every study, measured disease model beliefs. To what extent do you believe that opioid use disorder is a disease? And we also measured political identity. We did not ask people if they were Democrats or Republicans. We instead used a well-established measure. It was a 7-point scale that went from extremely liberal to extremely conservative, and people just put themselves on that scale. And here's what we found. Across all 6 studies, regardless of whether we were using student samples or we were using broader samples representing people across the U.S., perceived control over opioid addiction was the strongest, most consistent predictor. So the more people believe that opioid addiction is not in someone's control, the more strongly they support these evidence-based ideas. And we did find some other variables that were consistent in some studies, or that were significant in some studies, but none that were as consistent and powerful across every single study. So then we thought, what explains this perceived control? How do we explain that belief? So we turned it around and used the perceived control as the criterion variable and put back in the predictors that we had used for the other criteria. And now we find disease model beliefs is the most consistent predictor. Every single study, robustly significant, that little p-value thing. That means there's less than 1 chance in 1,000 that we get these results as a fluke or as a result of chance. These are strong findings. So essentially, if you believe that opioid addiction is a disease, then you believe it's not in the individual's control, or it's not entirely in the individual's control, and then you want to help. Conversely, if you don't believe it's a disease, then you think they can just, it's just a choice. It's, right? It's not a disease, it's a choice. And they should just say no and just stop it. And if they just stop it, we wouldn't have this problem, right? It's simple, just stop. So we also found in the non-student samples, political identity was also a significant predictor. It didn't bias anything in the student samples, but that makes sense, right? Because college students often don't have a clearly established political identity. But when we're looking at these samples of people living across the U.S. with an average age of our samples of like 35, 36, we're getting people who know whether they're conservative or liberal and where they fall on that continuum. So not surprisingly, the people who are more conservative were less likely to believe that addiction is a disease, less likely to believe, or more likely to think it's in people's control, and less likely to support these progressive responses. Okay, so wow, yay, we can explain it now, but I want to change it. Okay, I'm not satisfied with just being able to explain why some people reject the things that actually work. So my students and I now are trying to see if we can change people's disease model beliefs. Can we do something that will help people understand the scientific world's conclusion that addiction is in fact a disease? We tried it in one study. In fact, the first study in this group, we did try it where we actually randomly assigned students to watch a video of me explaining why addiction is a disease versus not watch the video. And the conclusion was they won't watch videos if you don't make them. Yes, it was an honors project, and my student's title when she presented it at the conference of honors was "Too long, didn't watch." Yes. So we got to find something that's more succinct, and especially for these non-student samples, these are MTurks participants that we're paying. And so we have to get the surveys as short a time as possible because, time is money. And so we're motivated to do that, but I'm interested if anybody has any ideas about how we might go about doing that. And while you're giving me your awesome ideas, I will also shout out to my crew. Okay, all of these students have worked on various ones of these projects. Some of them have worked on almost all of them. And I am very, very proud of my girls. Yeah, they rule. They really do. Most of them have graduated. The only one that's still here is Mallory Eilerman, who's actually working on her honors in psych with me now. So this is her study. If y'all got an idea, okay, about how we can change people's beliefs about addiction as disease, I'm up for it. Thank you. Or a really good suggestion. I can see you back at the office, Cecile, so let me get John. Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, yeah. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. 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 Right, because like maybe anybody could get a disease, but if it's a choice, I can just not make that choice. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. No. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Well, hey, but that's how this work happens, right? And research leads to more questions. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Well, we had that under the Affordable Care Act, right? The mental health and addiction treatment parity. Yeah, sweet. Oh, I know, exactly. Oh, yeah. Right, and they also have heroin-assisted treatment, and they have supervised injecting facilities. Yeah, right. You know, actually, I think that's one of the big wedge issues that I've tried, because if you're not going to change it, one way to change most Americans' ideas is if you tell them it costs less. Yeah. So yeah, that's I've made that argument. So. Thank you.
All great conversations. Please join us for the reception this afternoon to have more of those. One panel is getting set up right here, and one is getting set up over in Health Innovation 515. Please stay with us.
I found misspelled word in my PowerPoint. Can I correct it?
Sure. You have
Possibly.
just a minute to do
Okay,
it.
okay.
Which one is yours?
The first one, and it's the fourth. That's right. Trying to correct my misspelled word.
So, how do you pronounce your full name again?
Yasue, Kuwahara. Yeah, you pronounce every syllable. The fourth. Oh, actually, this one, sorry. No, the next one. Yeah. Thank you. That's all I wanted to do.
Actually, gonna pull all of them up here.
Hi.
I saw you. I'm Scott.
I'm Yasue.
Hi, Scott.
Years and years ago.
Hello?
I've seen it.
Hi, thank you all for being part of this. A quick question, would you all prefer Google, or do you just want to come one at a time?
Well, since we're talking here, we certainly need to come up one at a
Right,
time. I
yeah.
guess I don't know if there's a microphone.
So there's a microphone here, and then there's a microphone there. And we could
Maybe
use these.
maybe we can make our presentations here, and if,
And then
if there's really a rousing discussion,
Right,
then we can hand out the microphones. Is that all right?
and then we'll come up to the table. Yeah. Okay.
Meanwhile,
Or
we'll
we
just
just,
all
or we
stand
could just stand. Here.
during the conversation. That's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay.
What order do you have? Is it the
Yes,
order?
the same order. Yes.
I got my stopwatch.
Good for you.
Yeah.
I'll try my best.
So 7 minutes each.
7 minutes, yeah.
And then I'll go over it. And then we'll have about 9.
Okay. Real quick, all these microphones are powered off currently, so to turn them on, just click that button right there.
And to,
We are recording today, so be sure you speak into the phone and microphone or use one of these.
and how do we advance the slides?
There's a wireless presenter there, or you can use the keyboard.
That one. Okay.
And also, they provided a
On a,
this,
Oh, wow.
which works pretty well.
and
Very fancy.
this is hyperlink, right? Hyperlink.
Oh, they took away the chairs? Oh, yeah, we're gonna take them back.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. Have them at the ready. Yeah, exactly.
We're gonna have,
You don't want to miss out what's on the screen.
we're gonna have a 3 minute warning and a 1 minute warning.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Is that gonna be Mary doing that?
Yes.
Hey, Mary. Glad to see they put you to work.
Okay, we'll get started here.
Well, the 10, my 14 students, 15 students here.
Wow.
All the presentations are open, they're just minimized. Do you need me to help set them up or?
I think we're okay. And then they just, this is the, to move forward, so can we start off with that?
And I have to play my
Okay,
video
thank you.
first.
You can introduce all three of us at
Yes,
once?
I'll introduce you all and then, we'll come up. Hello, thank you again for joining us for Spotlight on Scholarship here at NKU. I am Brad McCombs, and I'm going to be the moderator for this panel. The focus of this panel is on global collaborations and beyond. I'd like to introduce all three of our panelists. I'll start with Yasue Kuwahara, who is assistant professor, professor in communication. He's going to be presenting Vanishing Traditional Performing Art of Japan. Nancy Jentsch, senior lecturer of world languages and literatures. And Scott, presenting from Kentucky to Kochel and back again. And Scott Nutter, professor of physics, geology, and engineering technology, the ISS-CREAM and HELIX projects at NKU. Okay, thank you again, and we're going to start with Yasue.
Thank you. Okay, I'll try to put as much as I can in 7 minutes. Stop it. Okay, so the topic of my research is Chindonya, people who are photographed here. What do they do? Hope this works. Okay, for the insert time, I just put it here. But you got the idea of what they do. And my PowerPoint. Okay. So Chindonya is a troupe of street musicians and performers dressed in elaborate costume who are hired to draw customers to shops, right? And the name Chindonya comes from their unique instrument. You can see in this picture and the third picture. Okay. The instrument consists of 2 small drums and 1 bell. So the sound of bell, chin, and the sound of drum, don, are combined, and they are called Chindonya. Okay. When I was a child, they were part of daily environment. So they came to my neighborhood weekly, and I followed them, just like other kids. But today, most Japanese don't know them. So I wondered why, and I went to Japan during my sabbatical leave in the spring semester. So this is still work in progress, but what I have found so far. So brief history of Chindonya. Okay. The origin of Chindonya can be traced back to mid-19th century. A candy salesman by the name of Amekatsu, who is here, used noisemaker and song to attract people. Okay. But Chindonya became important when free market economy started growing in Japan after Meiji Restoration. Okay. Just the image. During World War II, any street performance was prohibited. But as soon as war ended, they came back. Okay. And the heyday of Chindonya was 1950s and 1960s. So the biggest question I had when I went to Japan was, they have long history, and they sing, dance, they do all kinds of things. Still, unlike other traditional art, such as kabuki and jewelry, or folk art, you can see here, there's no effort to protect and preserve them. And I wondered why. Okay. And the answer to my question came during my interview with professional performers. And many of them, especially older ones, they don't consider this as art. It's a trade for them. It's business. It's something they do. Okay? And one of them actually said, unlike kabuki or jōruri, there is no kata, which means form, which had been handed down throughout generations. Okay? And what's most important to Chindonya is to get the attention of passers-by. So they, as you can see, they practically do everything, almost everything. Right? So they sing, dance, and wear costume, okay? And they also are aware of what's going on. Facts, they are keen to facts and current events. Okay? So adaptability is the key to their success, okay? Also their survival. Okay? Right. This is the poster of National Convention this year. And National Convention has been held since 1955 continuously, except for 2011, when Japan had that tsunami and earthquake. But most Japanese don't know the convention exists, myself included. I didn't know until 5 years ago. Okay. So as my progress, my research progress, I started thinking the reason Chindonya is not getting attention it deserves is its subculture. Okay. It was never part of the dominant culture. Why? At least one reason is the background of Chindoman. So performers, professionals, they like to call themselves Chindoman. And many of them are from working class. They are minimally educated. When sound movies were introduced to Japan, musicians lost jobs and they sought employment with Chindonya. The same thing happened to actors of popular theater. When the movie industry took audience away from them, they became Chindonya. Okay. And these people, Chindonya, as much as they contributed to the development of Japanese economy, they were left behind because what they did and their background was going against like middle class or dominant culture goal of westernization. They were anachronistic and people didn't pay attention. Okay. At least that's what I'm thinking at this point. Okay. And the future, oh yeah, these are two people. Okay. He was one of those. Okay. He joined Chindonya when he finished elementary school and he remained active until 92, until he died at the age of 92. Okay. And since I have only 30 seconds. Okay, the future briefly. Many people at the end of 20th century thought Chindonya was either gone or it's slowly dying. But actually in the mid-1980s, these two young people in their 20s were fascinated with Chindonya and they joined the trade. Since then, there have been small but steady number of young people who joined the trade. What's interesting is many of those people are college educated and they were trained in music. Also, people hire Chindonya for special occasions, not as business. So with all that change, 10 seconds, I think now it's evolving into an art form, remain to be seen. Okay, thank you.
Charge here. Try that.
So now we're going to leave Japan and take another trip. And my presentation is called From Kentucky to Kochel am See and back again. And my journey actually resulted in two things. You'll see that my journey actually had two destinations. One was course development here at NKU, which included collaboration with some other departments, and the other was a publication. And I'll talk a bit about that then at the end. So the journey all began in 2013 when I was going to be teaching in Munich, and I was going to be teaching a course on the culture and history of Munich. And I hadn't been there for many years, and I thought, there's some things I need to brush up on. And one of them was I wanted to seek further information on the group of German artists known as, in German, der Blaue Reiter, in English, the Blue Rider. The artist you might be familiar with from that group would be Kandinsky. He was one of the co-founders of the group. So when I went to Munich, I visited the big museums in Munich and saw the collections there. And then I decided I needed to do even more. So I took a trip. I went to a small town. It's not working. So we'll use this. How do I? Okay. Someone else will take care of that. So I went to a small town. There we go. Wrong button, sorry. So I went to a small town in Germany called Murnau, and it's a place where the members of the Blue Rider gathered to paint. They thought it was a picturesque place, and they also had a house there. One of the members owned a house there. Well, there are a few small museums in Murnau. There are 2 small museums that feature works by the Blue Rider, and so I visited them. And the second one was particularly interesting. For those of you that know the name Kandinsky, you'll be interested to know that he also did this type of painting. He was interested in folk art earlier in his career, and he painted some of the woodwork in that museum. It's a house museum. So those museums were pretty small, though, so I decided I could do even more, and I went to the train station and said, can I get to Kochel am See and back to Munich on my ticket that I had, my daily ticket that I had? And they said, yes, take a bus. So I drove through the Bavarian countryside on a bus to a town called Kochel am See. And the reason I wanted to go to Kochel am See, there you see it's located on a lake. That's the word See. So it's located on a lake, on one of the many alpine lakes in southern Bavaria. And the reason I wanted to go there was that there was another large museum there dedicated to the works of Franz Marc. And Franz Marc, along with Kandinsky, was a founder of the Blue Rider art group, and the dates for that are 1911 to 1914. The group really fell apart with the beginning of World War I. And in addition, Franz Marc lived for some time in Kochel am See, and that is where he is buried. So just a little idea of what the town looks like, and then went to the large Franz Marc museum there. So where is this all taking me? Well, it's taking me back to Kentucky. I came back to Kentucky and I decided, well, I really wanted to do something with my knowledge and interest in the Blue Rider. So I developed a course for my students here called History and Culture of Munich and incorporated a large unit on the Blue Rider. I did this in conjunction with Lisa Jameson from Art and Jenny Smith from Steely Library. So here are my students in Lisa's studio, and they are coming up with reverse glass painting reproductions of Blue Rider artwork. And I'll show you 2 examples. This is one student who doesn't have a background at all in art, but you can see the original on the left-hand side, and then his painting on the right-hand side, which is a mirror image, and then when you turn it over, it will look the same as the original. And then I also had some very talented students. This is another example of one of my students and her rendition. So that was part of what I was able to bring back from my trip to Kochel am See. And one more slide of that. We had our exhibition in the library, okay? And here we all are with them. And then I was also able to include 7 poems on works by the Blue Rider in a collaborative chapbook called Frame and Mount the Sky. And as any good research project is, it has something else, has a future. I'm continuing my desire to write about artworks and writing a series of poems about the artworks of a contemporary mixed media artist by the name of Bianca Atopy, and hoping for publication of that as well. So thank you.
So since I'm last, does that mean I get the rest of the time? Maybe not. I'd like to do something a little bit different here. I'd like to tell you about a science project, several science projects that I'm involved with, NASA sponsored. They're called ISS-CREAM, and that's cream on the ISS, the International Space Station, and you did get HELIX correctly. And of course, these are NASA acronyms that we chose because they sound cool, and you have to have an acronym if you're going to do anything with NASA. So I want to talk about particle astrophysics because I am a particle astrophysicist and otherworldly hijinks, and I had to look up how to spell hijinks correctly. I was pretty sure that was right. My wife and I had an argument about it, but that's a different presentation. So, I should mention that this picture I took myself. This is how I get into outer space because I have to go into outer space to do my experiments. This is about the size of a Honda Odyssey minivan, and that is the project that I was working on. It hangs from a giant crane. There's a long train here that the balloon expands into. This is a helium-filled balloon. This is a deployed parachute that brings the instrument down, and this goes up to about 110, 120,000 feet up in the air, far above where airplanes fly at 30,000 feet. We're above 99.5% of the atmosphere, essentially outer space. That's how a HELIX will get up into the atmosphere. This was the CREST experiment. ISS-CREAM, of course, got sent up in a Falcon 9 rocket and is now on the space station. So I thought, gee, I can teach everybody particle astrophysics in 7 minutes. Not going to happen. So this is my particle astrophysics slide. You all know, I will make an analogy with what astronomers do that you're familiar with. They use telescopes and take images of things by collecting photons in their telescopes, right? Their telescopes are collectors. I have particle collectors. Now, we get from stars and other objects in the galaxy these photons, light, radio waves, gamma rays, X-rays, etc. But we also get particles. And by particles, I talk about, what I mean is the nuclei of atoms. Because, you know, everything is made up of atoms. And in the violent places that are the surfaces of stars, the stellar remnants, black holes, etc., atoms are stripped of their electrons. They become charged, and they're easily accelerated by magnetic and electric fields. They're accelerated up to energies higher than what particle accelerators here on Earth can reach. So when I go to the top of the atmosphere, I am actually looking at a matter sample from outside our solar system, extrasolar material. That's pretty cool. If you wanted to get a cup and go to collect a sample of matter from another star, it would require a spaceship and a lot of effort, but why not just sit and collect it from the top of our atmosphere for free? So we can see how our solar system, which is a frozen sample of matter from 4.5 billion years ago, right, when it was created, compares to what's going on in the rest of the galaxy, which has had time to evolve and mix. So, you know, my studies occur above the atmosphere. When these high-energy particles reach the atmosphere, they can break up, and they have to break up. The atmosphere protects us from them, so I have to get up into space. That's why I get up there. Let me just briefly mention, I said that this is about the ISS-CREAM and HELIX experiments. ISS-CREAM on the space station, it measures nuclei of very, very high energies. HELIX is a balloon-borne launch, planned launch from Antarctica. We're starting to construct that, and we'll be busy this spring in Chicago putting that together and send it down next year. It uses a superconducting magnet and looks at particles that pass through. It measures actually the mass of the particles that go through. It doesn't just identify which nuclei they are by charge, but actually which isotope of lightweight nuclei they are. So these are all clues that help us understand what's going on in the rest of the galaxy. Now, this is called Global Collaborations and Beyond. And I at first thought, oh, global collaborations. I need to show who it is I work directly with. And these stars represent facilities and collaboration members that I work directly with around the world. And I realized, though, that I was really the beyond. So what comes into the beyond is, here's a picture of ISS-CREAM right now as it sits on the space station. That's its home. It's about the size of a refrigerator. It was placed there very using the two of the arms. There's two up there, actually, that I know of. The one that everybody knows of that Canada made, and the other one that I think Japan made. I'm not sure even. So I listed the people that I work with, and I just want to point out that it ranges from Japan, Korea, Canada, how do you spell Canada? C-A-N-A-D-A. That's the other joke I know. Remind me to tell you the first one, right? So it's, it's a really wonderful thing to be part of that. But here on Earth, right, what is it that brings me back to these collaborations? Well, I have expertise in the design and fabrication of a certain particle detection technology, plastic scintillation detectors, and you can see me working with some of that right here. I also do computer simulations, and here's a pretty picture. It's always necessary. This is a graphic from the computer of what a particle interaction looks like in the CREAM detector, one of the earlier detectors. I also am very involved in data analysis, and right now that's my main job with the data coming down from ice cream. I also have done a lot of logistical support. I was in Antarctica because I helped launch that, and I also will be participating in some tests, for example, at Plum Brook facility in northern Ohio later on this next spring. And so right now my main responsibilities are as data manager for ice cream. It's a NASA-appointed project, and I'm also the head simulations person for ice cream. And on HELIX, I'm part of the simulations team, and I'm responsible for one of the detectors that goes in the middle of the big magnet that we have. So I want to point out that a lot of students get some good experience out of this, and over the years I've had a number of students. I couldn't do it without them, frankly. They make great contributions, and I enjoy working with them. This past summer, these two gentlemen and Tyler Labrie also were in my lab every day, and I was working with them. And in the past, I've had other students make various parts of it, go to CERN to help me do some tests there. CERN is a particle accelerator near Geneva. We've had a lot of fun. And we do fabrication, testing, characterization, and simulation, all here at NKU. Here's the CREST team. There I am, right? This is down in Antarctica. It's not just the snow that gives it away. It's all the weird gear. This is a building on skis. And by the way, this right here, this is not the ground. This is about 20 feet of ice floating on water on the ice shelf, right? So it's a pretty special place, right? But the near future involves, about another year or two until ice cream breaks of data that comes down from the space station, and we'll analyze it. And HELIX, we've got to build it this spring and fly it in a couple years, 2020, I hope. Another trip to Antarctica, we'll see. I've got some new projects that I'm involved in. The Super Tiger and HNX. HNX is in the pre-proposal stages of being a satellite experiment. And we'll hopefully be proposing this spring for that. And I believe that is it. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a few minutes for questions. Do we have any questions to get us started? Okay. Yes.
Is this on? Yes. We talked a little bit before the presentation today. I was wondering if you had any specific ideas of ways you might involve students in your research. I know you talked about the possibility maybe involving the theater department.
Also, actually, I don't know if I can make this official yet, but earlier this morning, EMB in my department talked about study abroad. So we were thinking about taking students to Japan. Yeah, so that's at least one idea we're trying to do. And also, I'm trying to bring them here to the States, because they have been to Europe, and they are people who are interested in Japanese culture, really love them. So I somehow, get funding and try to bring them to the States.
So I have a question for Nancy and Yasue. I wondered if you could talk about postmodernism as it relates to both of your fields. I think is sort of exploring some of these ideas with the subcultures and sort of the resurgence of that, and then with the Blue Rider, sort of thinking about abstraction and the evolution of that, especially with the new artists that you're doing some research with.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what appeals to me with the Blue Rider, is that it sits kind of on the cusp of object-oriented art and then an abstract. And so I try to, what I've tried to do in my class as well, in addition to making those projects, they had the opportunity to do creative work. And when I taught the class here, I had one student, for example, compose a musical piece in a 12-tone style, which was kind of the musical equivalent of the abstract art. So I do try to emphasize that with the students, that it's, the beginning of this new period. And I think by actually working on the artwork that they did, that they just really learned a whole lot more about those specific artworks than they ever could have any other way, by reading a book or by reading a description, just simply by trying to follow the artist's brushstrokes. So I found it very effective.
Actually, that could be one direction my research will go. And as you saw, the subtitle of my presentation changed after I got more and more involved, because when I went to Japan, I thought vanishing, they will be gone. That's why I have to be there and get them. But as I said at the end of my presentation, so they will exist, but they will be changing. So, and my research is also changing. So I will study them as subculture, I think now. And in that process, yeah.
Okay, and then I've got a question for Scott. As students are engaged in the research and that opportunity to go to travel, go to different places or beyond, so how do you make those interactions happen? Do you what are some ways that you bring in ISS sort of experience to the students? Is that through video or through engaging with astronauts who are on the International Space Station and the research?
Right. So I'm focused really on the science side of it. I don't work directly with astronauts. Mm-hmm. Anything that's actually sort of a layer above me.
Right. Okay.
So what do my students get to do? Well, they get to present their work to an international collaboration and deal with the different cultures associated with that. So, for example, right now the ice cream collaboration has got a very strong Korean contingent, and it's when I've had a student. I don't think his picture made it on there. Carter Kring. He was presenting his work at collaboration meetings in Maryland with the Korean contingent there, and he had to interact with them. I also took Carter to South Korea with me a few years ago as we were trying to work out some details of one of the simulations, which are supposed to reflect reality. And so we needed to figure out what reality was by visiting and understanding the details of how the Koreans put together their instrumentation. And so he really excelled at representing NKU to the Koreans, both the elder statesmen and the younger people there, and I think he still is in touch with some of those people there. So you ask what kind of opportunities they have. It varies, but mostly it's in the same way that you would expect a scientist to do it, and that is through presenting their work and then the social aspect of it that comes afterwards.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
They are presenting. We have, yes, two. 10 minutes. One person canceled. We have 30 minutes. 30 minutes. 10, 10, 10. 10 minutes? 10, yes. That's the plan. Yes. Okay. That's good.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for helping us. Jensen. Oh, yeah. This is my student. Yeah. Yeah. In the email that we shared. Oh, that's good.
I only have 2 presentations. is that
Two,
correct?
just a 2
Okay.
today. And the mark is not coming, so delete
Okay.
that part. Yes.
Don't
no.
need that?
No.
So I only have the
Abdullah.
1 presentation.
And then the other one is a student will run.
Right, and that's
yeah,
her video.
That's her video.
All right. So you'd like this one pulled up?
Yes. How about the you go first?
I would like to.
Okay. All right. Good. And we have plenty of seat. You can. Yes.
Abdullah. Pleasure meeting you, Tracey. All right, perfect.
So we start 2 minutes from now. So 2:05. Yes. Oh, that's good. Bring the whole crowd.
The other PowerPoint first.
Which
Yes.
other PowerPoint?
Oh, that's
The
perfect.
racial difference.
I love that.
You had it up a second ago. That one.
This one?
That one's first. Yeah.
Okay. I thought that's the one I had up there. This one?
This one.
Okay. We are recording today, so I do ask you to speak into the podium microphone, or
Okay.
you take a lavalier microphone, or use a handheld.
I'll actually use this if you don't mind. I
They
tend
are
to walk
powered
around.
off, so if you just flip that little switch before you start speaking, then I'll adjust your level from up top.
Perfect. And your name is?
Tracy,
Tracey. I appreciate it, Tracey.
is there anything else I can help you with right now?
And this.
Yep.
That's
That
the-
will advance you.
Perfect.
You know, there was some question about the tables for the panel. Would you want the tables moved out for the panel? No?
Not me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. We want to respect your time, and we are ready to start another session. I am so glad that you are coming in this session, that I am so grateful to have all of you. We have about 30 minutes total this session. We have 2 prisoners. Unlikely we planned 3, and then our dear scholar and colleague, Mark, cannot make it due to the feeling not so well right now. So, but he will be okay. But we will give 2 strong and such a great colleague of mine, and also the great scholar on campus and very well known. So would you join me in welcoming them? As they are going, they will introduce themselves to you, and then we will do that. So as I am talking here, that I will serve this session as a moderator for this session. My name is Suki Kim from the social work program at NKU. I am delighted to have you and enjoy the session.
Thanks for the introduction. My name is Abdullah Al-bahrani. First of all, I'd like to start by saying I've learned so much today about my colleagues, and I'd like to thank the Research Council for making sure that this happens. With that said, my name is Abdullah Al-bahrani. I'm an associate professor of economics here at Northern Kentucky University, but I also run the Center for Economic Education. And what the Center for Economic Education does is we make sure that people in our community have the financial literacy and the economic knowledge to make the best decisions that they could make financially. So my research today falls into that category where we're examining the racial differences in the returns to financial literacy education. I'm a big believer in continuing the communication, so you could follow me on teach_econ on Instagram or Twitter, or email me, but it's important for us to get all your questions answered. So the motivation of this research is really derived from these graphs over here. What we know is historically the racial wealth gap has been increasing. Today, whites accumulate 12 times more wealth than minorities do. Okay? At least with respect to African Americans, 12 times. With respect to Hispanics, it's 10 times that. Economists have been interested in this research, and they've examined possible reasons why this might happen. They've looked at employment, they've looked at hours of work, they've looked at education, they've looked at labor force attachment. They've never really found an answer that completely answers the differences in wealth. So people now are starting to go towards another explanation, and that there are structural differences in our economy, i.e. racism. Okay? There's one area that hasn't been examined, and that's the role of financial literacy. So our market has become more dependent on individuals making the financial choices for themselves. So therefore, to operate and accumulate wealth in our economy, you need to know how the market works. So the question that we're asking in this research is whether financial literacy varies by race, and once we introduce financial literacy education, if that narrows the gap. So that's the premise of the story, and that's where we're going. So what we do is we use a publicly available data set called the National Financial Capability Study. And this study examines 27,000 individuals, roughly, and it asks them all types of questions: employment, age, income, marital status, family structure, but it also asks them questions about their access to financial literacy education, and also it asks them what we call the Big Five questions. And the Big Five questions are standardized financial literacy questions that economists have deemed to represent your entire financial literacy knowledge. Okay? So what we know from the data, summary statistics-wise, is minorities, on average, 41% of minorities have had financial literacy education offered to them. That is much higher than the 33% for whites. 27% of minorities have actually participated in a financial literacy course, whereas only 23% of whites have participated in a financial literacy course. However, with all of that, minorities still score 52% on those tests, on that test, compared to 63%. So being white, just being white, leads to you knowing more financial literacy questions. So we're still intrigued in trying to figure out what might that be due to. So we use a OLS regression, and we try to hold constant the fact that, you know what, there's variations in demographics, in income, in family structure that might lead to your knowledge of financial literacy. And then we try to single out the white variable, and then the financial literacy returns to financial literacy. And we then estimate it using, as I said, ordinary least squares. So this is what I find. These are the findings for the entire paper. Being white alone, holding everything else constant, means that you're going to score 6.9 percentage points higher than anybody else. So race persists as an explanatory variable on your financial literacy knowledge. Now, for me, as the director for the Center for Economic Education and somebody that's passionate about financial literacy, I'm happy to see that taking a financial literacy course leads to a 5.2% increase in your knowledge. And that's really important for the state of Kentucky today, because this year the state of Kentucky mandated that every high school student graduating 2020 has to take a financial literacy course. So the evidence shows that as citizens of Kentucky, we will be more knowledgeable in the future. Also, at Northern Kentucky University, if you're interested, in the spring, we have a financial literacy course called FLC 101 that you could all enroll in. Findings for this paper, and this is the sad result that we have, is being white and participating in a financial literacy course will yield you a 1.7% increase in your financial literacy over a minority. Okay? So that leads us to ask, why is it being white going to give you a higher return in your financial literacy than for minorities? And that's really where the next questions are going in my research. So the first question is, well, in our data, we can't tell the access to teacher quality. Maybe minorities have lower teacher quality than the whites. Also, we have no way to standardize curriculum. It's possible that minority neighborhoods are receiving old textbooks that teach financial literacy, whereas white neighborhoods are receiving better textbooks. Also, in our data, we cannot tell how long somebody stayed in a financial literacy course. So we know that minorities enroll into financial literacy courses at a higher rate, but we don't know if they complete them. Okay? So that might be driving the results. Going forward, what we're doing is we're actually separating what we call formal and informal education. There's this hypothesis out there that, you know what, most of the financial literacy that you know actually happens at home. So that's what we call the informal education. And just to give you preliminary results, and don't tell your parents I said this, but parents don't matter. Okay? So you don't learn much from your parents when it comes to financial literacy. That means you don't learn the good stuff and you don't learn the bad stuff. Actually, where we learn most of our financial literacy education is from employers. Okay? High school financial literacy education helps. College financial literacy education helps. But the one that really helps the most is employer education. And the hypothesis that we have is this idea of just-in-time education. When you receive the financial literacy education from your employer, it's at the same time, or it's correlated with the time where you're making a lot of your financial decisions. So it's more likely to resonate with you. So before I end today, I really want to highlight the fact that most of this research was helped by Matt Fry and Jacob Kors. Both of them are undergraduate students here at Northern Kentucky University, majoring in economics. And you know, this has been the theme today, that at NKU we highlight how important our students are. And if you're a student over here, please do get involved with research. We appreciate it, and you learn a lot from the process. With that said, if you have any questions, I know we'll have a Q&A at the end, but feel free to reach out to me via Twitter at teach_econ or via email. Thank you for your time.
We'll see what we can do here.
Yeah, we had it on the desktop yesterday. The video.
Okay. It's actually in that folder that says new folder.
Okay.
All right.
Good to go?
Hi, everybody.
We're ready? All right, excellent. My name is Casey Russell,
I'm Tracey Bonner.
and I'm from the Department of Chemistry. Tracy's from Theater and Dance, and we are going to present to you today a little bit of work that we did trying to integrate both chemistry and dance. And we have a lot of this on video, so we're going to be...
Yeah, and I know it doesn't seem possible, but it's actually been really, really fun. And all of my students that are in here, that you know, you have to do your social media posts to get your points for today. Right?
All right, so the way we're going to start this is we are actually going to let the student who got this whole thing started, has recorded a little video for us, and we're going to let her introduce everything.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Edwards. I'm an NKU alumni of 2018 from the Dance and Chemistry Department. While I was at NKU, I was in Dr. Russell's chem writing class where we wrote a research proposal. My research proposal was on using dance to help teach organic chemistry. From that proposal, I was able to introduce Tracey Bonner and Dr. Russell from the two departments to help make the project happen. I was lucky enough to do the first rehearsal kind of stages of the research, and then was able to watch it after graduation in an actual chemistry class. It works great, and it's going to help so many chemistry students.
So after that project she presented in class, I actually approached her and said, would it be all right if I borrowed your idea and wrote a grant based on that idea? And that's exactly what we did, and we were lucky to be funded by the College of Arts and Sciences to work on this. At that point, Tracey and I got together.
And what was really cool was Kirsten, with several of the dancers, some of you that are here, we were actually at a dance conference, and we found out that our proposal got accepted the night we were performing, which was also really cool. So we knew we had a new project to come back to once we finished the festival. So
when we started the project, I kind of had a little bit of idea. I mean, a lot of chemistry is motion and things like this. but really had no idea how dancers would be able to do this. So really, working very closely with Tracey, I kind of proposed what chemists kind of have to see, and she told me how dancers could kind of emulate that. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to show you a little bit of a video. The idea overall is to be able to take these concepts and kind of package them individually. So each concept a chemist or a chemistry student would be able to see how it would be represented by dance.
And we used the various genres of dance. So ballet is a terminology that we use the most. So that was one of our baseline places to start. So you'll see things like arabesque, derrière, and tendu effacé, and things like that you may not know what they are. But that's what we used to create the models. We also used models of modern dance, because modern dance, as you know, has a sense of gooiness to it. So it created what we would call stable or unstable as far as what it looks like in a chemical atom or in a chemical compound. And then we also use social dance like swing to show connection and disconnection. So it's really kind of cool. You won't see all of that today, but you will see a demo of one thing that we did.
So that's what we're going to start with. We're going to show a demo of just one of the many dances that we recorded. We're going to start by showing kind of a chemical representation of that. So the idea here is, although it's kind of moved on, this idea is called pseudo-rotation. It's kind of like the wave, if you imagine going to a football game or whatever. What happens is the molecule is actually standing still, but parts of it are going up and down. So the first atom starts up, it moves down, the second one goes up, comes back down, the third one goes up and comes down. And this is a chemical model that would represent that.
And immediately following that, you'll see the dancer's model of that is this ballet terminology that we talked about with an arabesque derrière and a sous-sus fifth.
Things about this was because we had the dancers, and it's always nice to see a video, it's always nice to see things live. So we were able to work it out to get some of the dancers who were available to come to my class recently and demonstrate this same thing. All right, so this is pseudo-rotation. I leave it to you.
We're done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Excellent. Good job. So the next thing we're going to do is so after this is very nice for us, to get our dancers together and be able to show these things. But the whole idea is for the students to find different ways to learn chemical concepts. And so afterwards, we put out a little poll to ask the students several questions about the dance experience, and here's some of those answers. So what was their impression? Well, generally speaking, the students felt, there were 31 students who responded to this. Generally speaking, everyone felt that it was pretty good. We asked them whether they thought it helped them understand this concept of pseudo-rotation, seeing the dancers perform it. Again, very good response to that. Students generally felt it did help them. Those students who marked number 5 specifically said, I felt I already had a very good understanding of what pseudo-rotation was, so the video didn't really add much to my understanding. Some other questions we asked, would they like to see more of this? Absolutely. If there were videos available to watch, which is what we're trying to do to package them separately, because we can't do everything in class, every participant said they would absolutely watch them or probably watch them. Would they be interested in participating? Not necessarily in these videos per se, but any other developments that would integrate maybe dance or other learning methods. And 71% of the class said they would love to be involved in something else. Finally, one of our colleagues, Amber Honorado, recorded this live session and put it up on social media. We wanted to see what the response was. The first thing I just want to point out, within a very short time, this had 11,000 views, which is pretty good. There were also a few responses that you can see here, people wanting to use it in their own classes, and maybe we can point to the...
I can Vanna White for you.
Yeah. So, yeah, right. Love this, right? Are there other videos is the question.
And the answer is yes.
Absolutely.
There will be many, thanks to our lovely BFA over here running our computer, Jensen Odell, that this is her senior project to put all these videos together. So, yeah.
Yeah, so these are the other videos we filmed. There are more than 20 of them that we are going through the process of packaging together to get into a format for the students to be able to use.
And what was also really cool with our presentation, with our live lecture demonstration, some of the dance students that were in class at the time came and watched, and that happened to be one of our classes that has a high number of SHEP students in it. So the SHEP students also were very invested and involved in that learning process. And so just the idea of being able to use kinesthetic learning rather than just model learning or animation learning really opens up so many possibilities for a number of students that function and think in different ways.
And I think that closes our presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Andy is so great. I am so glad you are here. Thank you so much for this exciting presentation. I have no idea what's next. Maybe social work and dance next time?
Sorry, what?
Social work and dance.
I'm all about it.
Mathematics and dance.
Let's do it. Yeah.
This is so great.
Yeah.
So I want to open any questions, thoughts, and comments based on this presentation you heard. So this is your time. We have about 3 minutes. So this is plenty of time for us to talk.
Yeah, we'll come out here.
We can stand. It doesn't matter.
Sit, we can stand.
Doesn't matter.
We'll stand. I'd rather stand too.
Any questions, anybody? Yeah.
There were several of them.
We had to get creative. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was simply the genre of movement we were using. For example, the modern dance, what we would often do is if we would make a connection like this, then this would be a double connection, right? We would hold on. And so then when it released, it became like unstable, but then it had to be stable again. Do you see what I'm saying? So having to figure out how to do that, a lot of it was trial and error. And so we spent the whole fall semester, 2 or 3 hours every Friday, with the dancers in the studio, just kind of figuring it out and being like, oh, that really works or that doesn't work. And there was the one that we did where we were trying to make it really smooth. And we tried laying down, we tried cartwheels, we tried laying on our backs and using our legs. Like we tried every way we could think of to make it happen in a super smooth way. And I don't think we ever accomplished that one. So that's on the list. Yeah. Oh, you can count on it. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. You should talk about it.
Well, it kind of started, we needed a way for the dancers to be able to show this idea of motion of these atoms up and down, but still keep them connected. And I was trying to think of something very visual that would do that. And it seemed like pool noodles would be a good way to represent the chemical bonds. Usually what we did in the videos that you didn't see is we used that physical hand-to-hand connection, but this just wouldn't lend itself to that. And so that was kind of our solution.
Yeah.
So we bought like 30 pool noodles with the grant money and cut them up to the right lengths.
And got some fabric, some like trash fabric from the costume shop and cut it in pieces and tied it together. And then a bunch of pool balls, inflatable pool balls.
Over the last half century or so, we've had a tremendous shift of risk from government to large organizations to individuals, things like shifting from states funding higher education to making students take out their own loans. And have you studied the evolution of financial literacy over time? It seems like we need it more now, but do we have more or less? And have there been earlier studies of it?
All right. Is this working? Okay. So you highlight an important thing. In the 80s, we kind of pushed the responsibility of financial decision-making from employer and government to the individual. However, we did not pass on the educational skills to make those decisions. So usually when I talk about financial literacy, a lot of people say, you know what, today's millennials don't know anything about money. Well, they're as equivalent to the generation before them, but now they have to make more of the financial decisions. And that's why the Center for Economic Education exists, because if we're going to depend on individuals to make the decisions, we need to equip them with the tools to make those decisions. So yes, it is correlated. All right, so they're called the Big Five questions. I could send them to you, but they're publicly available. If you just Google Big Five financial literacy questions, you'll get them. And what you will realize that this is one of the limitations of this research. It has a lot to do with financial markets and not day-to-day activities. So one area that I'm looking at is, are there better questions that actually tackle what NKU graduate the decisions that they might have to make? Because not many people know the inverse relationship between bonds and prices, but you could still make financial decisions without knowing that. But according to the financial literacy questions, you don't have the skill sets if you don't know that. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Do the questions.
So that's one thing that I'm looking at, is the questions might have a racial bias, one, and then two, we're just looking at financial literacy scores. That has nothing to do with financial behaviors. And ultimately, that's what we're interested in. We're using financial literacy as a proxy of you making financial behaviors. So our research is extending that way. And what we're seeing is financial literacy courses do not help you make short-term financial behaviors, like buying groceries. What they actually help you do is they help you make better long-term decisions, i.e. investing in your retirement account. Thank you.
One thing I forgot to say in our presentation that I think is important for you guys to hear. Kirsten, that was the beginning of our video, she's working for Teach for America, teaching biology to middle schoolers while dancing at the Tulsa Ballet. So you can do both. Yeah, I just thought that was important to say. So.
Any other questions? Unlike the other session, I believe, we have a student involvement. Can I ask, or can we ask your experience to being involved in this project? Would you share with us a few words?
Does anybody have questions for Jensen with this project?
So basically this all started with, we do BFA evaluations at the end of every semester, and I did a video production for mine just because I think it's really fun and I enjoy video editing. And Tracey saw that, and then this semester she was like, hey, we're looking for a video editor for this project, and I think that it would be a really good fit for your senior project. And so that's how she got me on board.
Last opportunity, if you have any question, you know how to find them, right? So we really thank you for taking time to presenting to us. This is exciting. We cannot wait to see what's next. Thank you for coming this session. Enjoy the rest of the event. I'm glad to see you, everyone.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, very nice.
Very creative. Pleasure.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To be continued.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah. It's still in progress.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
Thanks, lady. Oh, wow.
Thanks.
Yeah, use a combination of the hand mic and the clip-on. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Good luck for
Or
you as
podium
well.
mic. Yeah, we put them all on PowerPoint, so
Yeah, so
there's
it's really fun.
a little bit easier.
There's only one, you say?
There's 3 presenters, but only one presentation.
Okay.
We put them all together.
Great, that is awesome, thank you. Marlon's presented right there.
Okay. So, if you guys picked an order, who wants to go?
We were going to go in the order that we put it
Okay.
on here, if that's okay.
Okay, so Jennifer's first, and where is she?
I don't see her.
Just a quick reminder, we are recording, so I ask if you use the podium mic or allow the one that microphone.
Can do.
Thank you.
Either. Whichever you want to do. If you're more comfortable with that.
I might do this one instead.
Yeah. Okay. And we do a presenter remote.
Hi. Oh, that's cool.
You all good, James?
Well, we need one more panelist.
Who are you missing?
Jennifer. Could you time it? Yeah. Yeah. So.
So we have just one presentation. Do you want me to talk for that slide?
We have 4 people, 3 presentations. That's what makes it.
How about like 6 minutes, 7 minutes each?
Yeah, 6 or 7 each. Yeah.
Maybe let you know when it's a 3 and a 1 and then done. 2 minutes, spend a 1 minute and then done. You got it. Sounds good.
These handhelds are powered off, so if you need those.
Yep.
Does this work?
Yeah. Yeah, give it a try.
You have like an animation thing, right? Yeah, there you go. That'll work.
So as far as you know, you and Jennifer was good last time you...
Via email, yeah.
We put this all together. We coordinated the email. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's what I think. I thought I saw an email.
PowerPoint. We go in a different order.
Yeah.
I can start. Yeah.
Yeah, let's plan on you going first, unless she shows up at this one.
You know what she looks like?
Yeah,
No,
she's
actually, I
blonde
haven't met her.
with
You? Okay, so you
long
better.
hair.
Okay.
We've met with her. The 3 of us met to talk about
so
this
you
ahead
did
of
know.
time. Yeah. I was just about to start.
You guys are in this building, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I was like out there waiting.
Oh, we were in the previous session too, watching. Yeah. So this is the part of the previous. And then there's a wireless mic, or there's like a earphone.
Well, they're both wireless, but yeah.
Yeah, sorry, both wireless.
Different ways. Is this the on status or not? They always color code them, which doesn't help me.
We're talking at an insane task. Why don't we sit? Since it's a panel.
You're upstairs, yeah. Yeah, the 2 panels ago did this. So
That's it.
you're welcome to please sit.
I'd rather sit. Can't do 2 things at once. Stand and talk.
So when it's our turn, we get to walk around.
As long as you hold a microphone, because they're recording the whole thing, and so you just have to make sure that we're
Like hold a microphone.
Yeah. Yeah, people have
Just.
nowadays. Some have been walking. Some have been standing and then sitting at the end for questions. Whatever he wants to do.
And so, yes, we'll have the presenter remote, the mic, for you, so I'll do this.
All right. Someone's holding the numbers. Time.
Yeah, the research grants and contracts, people will time you, tell you when you've got 3 minutes and 1 minute left.
Okay, off of the 7 minutes.
Is it 7 minutes? Is that okay? Mine should be really short. You don't have the bigger problem is people going over throughout the day. My impression.
Yeah, we've had more
I
people
can
go
do
over.
this in like 5 minutes. I can do it in like an hour.
Yeah.
Like getting that like.
Closer to 5.
I think even for the time.
Right.
It seems like people would make.
No
Fair
class
enough.
bonus for this.
What?
No class bonus for this panel.
I know. No,
The students
I'm
left.
here for extra credit.
Lining up. My students.
Yeah, that's funny. Late enough in the day for computer science and IT students to show up.
There was a different report that professors were saying. Dance class was helping the chemistry program. They were like acting out videos of different like chemical reactions. So they brought all the dance students in to watch what they were doing.
Actually, what is our time here? I see. 37. 3 more minutes.
My husband's here. That's nice. He'll probably tweet about us if you don't mind being online.
Oh, that's good.
Last time he was in the first. Yeah, you have one chair. I'm sorry for you. You can use the tall chair.
That's for you. That's for me. I see.
We can stand up on the design. That's easier, yeah.
I'm in the panel after this, just for refreshing. Are we going to have a break between panels?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, so I can figure out.
Oh, right. Yeah, we don't, we're just,
You don't have to.
yeah.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah, you guys don't have any departments? So no chair, just the college level? Yeah, people are beautiful.
We have 18 doctrinal faculty, and then library faculty. So it's like a large department. So that's why yeah, there's no, and also just with the discipline, there's no way to like segment. We're all doing the same thing, more or less.
Do you all end up going to like the same conferences, or are there like subgenres of conferences that you're going to?
There's one primary gospel conference that's like the first week of January when we haven't gone back to school yet for all law school.
Okay. Our next panel is the era of fake news, free speech, psychology, and science. We've got 4 panelists and 3 presentations as one pair collaborated. And the panelists will introduce themselves as they begin their presentation. So I'll hand it off to Jennifer next.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Kinsley. I am a professor of law at Chase College of Law. And it is a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon as we explore the interesting topic of free speech, fake news, and the role that science and the law can play. So my work is called Therapeutic Expression, and it explores the relationship between speech and harm. And it will come as no surprise to you, come on in, that we are in an era of unprecedented access to speech, both on what I'll call the high value end, meaning speech that is informational, informative, speech that teaches us something, and then speech on the low end, speech that I think most people would agree lacks critical social value. Things like hate speech, social media post fluffery, fake news, false reports, things that really do not drive conversation forward. And in the wake of this explosion of expression, a debate has ignited around where the First Amendment should draw lines, what speech should be protected and what speech should not. And many proponents advance an argument that is not new, but growing in force, that speech should be restricted based on its propensity to cause interpersonal or social harm. So this got me thinking, what is the actual relationship between speech and harm? Do words really hurt? And if they hurt, what kind of hurt do they cause? Is this the proper place for the First Amendment to be drawing lines? And can even harmful speech have value? Can it still mean something? So let me outline for you basically the 2 sides of this debate. On the one hand, we have the concept that speech does in fact cause harm. And we see this historically embedded in some of our First Amendment jurisprudence. So the law embodies, not explicitly, but sort of indirectly, this idea that certain speech is so harmful that it is not constitutionally protected. In this vein, we have things like obscenity, which is not, I don't mean obscene words, I mean the legal term obscenity, which is sexual depictions that are patently offensive, that lack social, serious, artistic, literary, scientific value. We see things like child pornography, and we see things like true threats, meaning speech that is directed to a particular person or group with the intent to cause immediate physical harm to that group. These historical distinctions have morphed into a current debate that says that speech is so weaponized at times that we need to retreat from it. So we see calls on college campuses for things like safe spaces, places where people can retreat and feel safe from speech that harms them. We also see things like trigger warnings, letting you know when you are going to confront something that might hurt you in terms of words. And the idea, especially embodied in fake news, that speech can be a weapon, that speech can be used to further international espionage. The idea that words in and of themselves are harmful. I want to flip that debate around. So I want to think about the harm that happens when speech is silenced. Let me pause right there. I want to think about the harm that happens when speech is silenced. And in my work, I'm drawing from psychological literature that talks about the real harms on an interpersonal level of censorship. So this image that I've got here, this is the Aurora, Colorado shooter, James Holmes. And I stumbled on a fact that's so interesting about his case. The day before he went into a theater and killed many, many people, he kept a journal. He was writing out exactly what he was going to do. He had been in psychological treatment that ended for a variety of reasons unrelated to what ultimately happened. And he wrote that journal with the intent of sending it to his therapist. And I can't help but think, what would have happened if someone could have intervened because of his words? Maybe those harmful words gave us a clue of the more serious physical harm that was to follow. What happens psychologically when a person is not able to give expression to the thoughts in their mind? My argument is that serious physical damage happens when people are silenced. So the relationship between speech and harm is complicated, and it's one worth exploring. And in my mind, this is not where the First Amendment should be drawing lines, because it's simply too dangerous. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Alina Campan. I'm representing the science part of the panel. I doubt this was the original order in the title of the panel, but here we are. Talking about free speech, we have the wonderful tools, the online social networks nowadays that are pervasive, and they are used in so many different ways. Starting with being a tool to interact with your friend community, being a marketing medium, for example, for targeted marketing, but also they are a medium where news production and sharing happens. The fact is, OSNs, online social networks, are not just used by well-established news outlets. They are used by everybody. As such, there's going to be an expansion of news that are generated, which can be both genuine and also fake. since they are not controlled by a central authority or verified before they are distributed. So we have the genuine news, which are not focusing on. We also have the deceptive news. And there are different ways to classify the fake news depending on how they are created, with what kind of content, what the purpose of distributing them is. And there are examples like clickbait, where the news are created with intention to increase clicks to add revenue. We have propaganda, opinion, satire. There are also different classifications of fake news. Misinformation, when the distributor really believes the fake news they are distributing. And then disinformation, where the creator or the distributor of the news is aware of the false content. And we'll see how that happens in the process of spreading on online fake news. So the research in the field, either independent researchers or big companies, are focusing on how to identify and how to curb the news spreading, the fake news spreading. To be able to do so, there are studies beforehand to understand how the propagation happens, so to know where to strike. So here's a very fancy illustration of Twitter, and I'm going to show you how an attack happens. This is actually a study case that was presented in 2017, and it's an attack that happened in 2010 in, I think, the Massachusetts U.S. Senate. So the first step would be to create one or more websites that host the fake news. And of course, they are supposed to be, and they are, in a format that's close to the genuine news websites. Then, in the second step, the attackers will infiltrate in the network by creating anonymous Twitter accounts. This happened on Twitter. Then, they would identify and follow influential real Twitter accounts, users, or user communities that are inclined to believe the fake news that were created beforehand. So they will identify these Twitter accounts, and they will follow them. So that's the start of the attack. What happens next, they will retweet tweets that originate from the influential users, but they would be adding links to their fake content. Okay, so these are actually not retweets, replies to the influential users' tweets. What happens next? They just need to wait. Wait for what? Wait for the original tweeters that got their retweets with the added fake news link to further distribute the content to their followers. So in the attack that I was talking about, there were in the end about 60,000 real users that were retweeted the links to the fake news website by the influential users. So you realize if you follow someone that's kind of an personality that you trust, and they would be sending you a tweet with a link that's fake, you kind of trust them. Okay? So there are several ways to counter attack this kind of fake news spreading attacks. And I'm not going to discuss about all of this because time is, I'm out of time. But in mainly what we focus on is the point, the fourth bullet down, where we try to see if there is currently, if there is any difference in how fake news and genuine news spread, in particular on Twitter, and if they have different signatures in how they spread, then they can be automatically flagged as being fake. And then there are other measures that can happen, being blocked or being only flagged as being fake and be allowed to still distribute further, but with a warning about the fake content. So that's where our research is.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Alyssa Appelman. I'm a professor in the journalism program here. And thank you to the University Research Council. Thank you to everybody for putting this together. This has been a really interesting day. We've learned all kinds of, if anyone has been here for multiple sessions, lots of really interesting collaborations. And from a personal standpoint, the three of us have actually met ahead of time to put together this panel. We put this all together in one PowerPoint and realized that we had overlap in research. So I had no idea as a journalism professor that professors in computer science were looking at how fake news is spreading online, that people in the law school were looking at the free expression, free press. So this has been a really exciting collaboration. So thank you guys for a great day. So like I said, I'm in the journalism program. My presentation today is called Analysis of the Psychological Effects of Journalistic Acronyms. Flip over here. So a little bit of background. My research in general looks at what I call news media psychology, an area of research where we're looking at how readers process news media and how that affects how they think about things. So how they think about things, how they feel about things. So cognitive and perceptual effects of news. I'm particularly interested in news style. So in my previous life, I worked as a copy editor. So my role was to look at how news gets presented, what kind of headlines we use, checking for grammar, checking for style, for consistency, things like that. So less concerned with kind of the content and more with the presentation and the style. So I'm looking, my research looks at how different elements of news style affect readers and affect how much readers trust information, and how likely readers are to keep reading information. I say readers because most of my work looks at print media, print and online, looks at textual media. So this particular project, this acronym project that I'm presenting today, is a two-part study that I conducted with support of NKU through NKU Summer Fellowship a couple of years ago and through support from the communication department. The first part of the study was a content analysis of acronyms and news headlines. So I looked at, and I'll show in more detail on the next slide what this consisted of, but I looked at what acronyms we use in headlines and newspapers. Acronyms being things like this, right? Like using NASA to represent the longer term thing. I'll go on the next page as well. But using a few words to describe something that would be longer. And what that looks like. And then study number 2, I found what those popular acronyms and headlines were, and I did a survey to see if the people that we say are going to read our news articles understand what that means. So the bigger goal here was looking at reader engagement. In my abstract that's in the program, if you take a look at it, I'm talking about this in the context of media credibility, people trusting media, people having issues with trusting media, some lack of engagement with readers. So what I'm looking at is to see if acronyms and headlines are off-putting, like if we're using jargon in terms that are off-putting to readers, and that might be causing some of the problems. So in my first study, I did this content analysis of acronyms and news headlines. I looked at a sample from the Cincinnati Enquirer. In news research, we call these constructed weeks is what I put together. So basically, instead of finding just a bunch of issues of the paper, it was a systematic sample of the paper with a certain number of Mondays and a certain number of Tuesdays and a certain number of Wednesdays, because news content tends to differ based on day of the week, the kind of thing that people tend to publish. So I looked at 6 constructed weeks, and I found 150 different acronyms that they used in their headlines. Then I did a survey to see if the people who are the intended readers of this publication knew what those acronyms meant. So I did a survey of 209 residents. These were the 27 most common of the acronyms in that original study. And so you can try to kind of test yourself up here if you can see. I gave them the acronym. I asked them what the letter stood for. You can see NKU up there. A lot of people got it right, so that's good. Stood for Northern Kentucky University. I also asked them, like, do you kind of know what this means? So a lot of people didn't necessarily know what NASCAR stood for, but they knew that it was this, like, racing kind of thing. Does anyone know what NASCAR stands for while we're here? The National Association of Stock Car Auto Racing. Very good. Our sports journalist knows that, which is good. So I did this study. What do the letters stand for? What does this basically mean? And overall, most people struggled to identify or describe these. There were a lot of issues. I have a specific data table with percentages if you guys are interested later. But basically, the acronyms that journalists are using in headlines, readers are having problems understanding. The next question I asked them was, what do you think when you see something like this? Like when you see an acronym in a headline, what do you do? So some people were saying things like, oh, I'll just like Google it to figure out what it means, or I'll kind of read the article and then like I'll kind of get it from context. But there was a huge chunk of people who said things like this, if you can see at the bottom of the screen here, that jargon is elitist, that journalists are being lazy, just type the extra letter. There was a lot of feedback about like very negative comments about journalists. So the study that I'm doing next is going to try to kind of quantify this a little bit more. So the conclusions that I have from this particular batch of studies is that this acronym use is really common and it bothers readers. And that if anything, journalists should err on the side of over-explaining rather than under-explaining, and that this could help journalists regain trust. So the project I'm working right now is a more kind of dedicated experiment to see, I'm going to give people articles with specific acronyms in it, see what the effect is on them. Do they remember things from the article? Do they not read the article? Things like that. And again, journalists have always used acronyms in headlines in general because they're shorter, right? But they're doing this even more online because you're trying to cut down your word count. So if anything, this is kind of becoming a bigger problem rather than a smaller problem. So we're going to keep looking into this and see what happens in the future. So thank you all very much.
Okay, that's our panel presentation. Next, I'd like to ask if you have any questions. Yes.
Yes, thank you for this question. This is a very good question. By the way, my name is Mario Strutz. I'm also from Computer Science Department. So indeed, the fake news has its own circle of circulation, as you mentioned. If you fight and you limit fake news in a particular medium, they will find way to be propagated, to be distributed in other ways, as we all know. But the idea of people that are making those fake news is not just to reinforce the same thing, is to reinforce and to, in a way, make those people be a little bit more and more extremist in that area. So make them more committed to the cause. And this is true whenever there are differences, political differences, or any other kind of differences. It's important to look now because the society is so divided, but if you look back in the past, it may be even we can see better examples. No one lived in this audience in the First World War. But this is when a lot of things have started. UK, which is United Kingdom, or, okay, so talking about, because really that's how, when I saw UK, I was thinking about United Kingdom, not University of Kentucky. United Kingdom started a lot of disinformation intentionally to show that Germany was doing a lot of bad things. And again, I'm talking about the First World War, and not the Second World War. And some of them were true, but they exaggerated this in order to make people more patriotic. Germany did the same thing. So this exacerbated a lot, and they continued a lot after the war. Even maybe 20, 30 years after the war, they still had the same kind of impression about those people, even maybe 8 years after the war. And more recently, they realized that most of those things were just created to disinform and to reinforce, and not just to reinforce, and to add more and make people to be more and more on one side and to split them apart. And this happens whenever the society becomes more divided, and it tends to aggravate over time. I'm from computer science, so I don't have a solution for this. So this is not what we want to do, but it's definitely a problem, and it's a problem that every society has. Sometimes a society avoids those kind of things when they find a common enemy. Not necessarily a war, but you find someone, terrorism, Russians, something like that. And everybody goes together for one idea. But when there is nobody else and we start to fight each other, then even within a society we can have those kind of divisions which get bigger and bigger. I hope this answers your question. Thank you.
And if I might add, I don't think that's a question that a computer scientist can answer, but maybe a group of people collaborating from different fields could better answer the question, right? I'm not trained at all in knowing what happens psychologically or otherwise if you're less or more exposed. So what we can do is curve the exposure. Will that have any effect? I have no idea.
So do we have other questions? Yeah. Sakura?
Yeah, thanks for the question. For those of you in the back, I don't know if you heard it, but Professor Mannheimer is asking if this is, in effect, a cost-benefit analysis. If we just look at the speech and then decide if it is harmful enough to suppress it or if it has some potential value and then we would not suppress it. And my response to that is twofold. First of all, I am not advocating for additional censorship based on new categories of harm. All I'm talking about are the existing categories of speech where historically our country has said we do not offer constitutional protection to this kind of speech because it harms. Things like child pornography. So if you look at the Supreme Court's decisions determining that child pornography is not constitutionally protected, it's full of language connecting the harm of that speech to the children who are depicted in it. So rather than arguing that there should be additional categories that should be, speech that should be carved out of the First Amendment because it's harmful, I'm not going that far. On the other side, I think there are people who do have this gut instinct that we really shouldn't be protecting as a country, speech that hurts someone. And that ranges from hurt feelings, this sort of bullying kind of speech at its lowest level, all the way up to things like the alt-right news. It's advocating a particular viewpoint. Speech that causes societal harms like that. And my point is simply that rather than focusing so much on harm, we should be looking at the flip side. What happens when someone is silenced? What happens when a viewpoint is silenced? And I think both the anecdotes and the research bears out, the psychological research bears out, that when people are censored, they act out as a result. And so I just want to flip the equation around. Rather than focusing on the harm of speech, I want to focus on the harm of censorship.
Okay. Do you still have a question on the third row? Yeah.
I think that's a great question. Thank you so much. And I think it does speak to something when we talk about fake news. When we were talking about how there's different definitions, right? So there's a difference between news that's known to be fake at the time, that's intentionally being spread without regard for truth, versus well-meaning news organization sharing information that ends up not having been complete. So I think there's a difference, and there's something that we talk a lot about in class, a lot in our media ethics classes and things like that. So the mechanism in place that we talk about is transparency. So the idea that we found out we made a mistake, we're going to run a correction to say, this is what we thought, this is what it's going to, or this is what we found out is actually going on. So I've actually done some research on corrections, and one of the problems is that sometimes when corrections are run, from a psychological standpoint, people will remember the fake information, and they'll kind of remember that they heard about it, but they won't remember that it was changed, or they'll remember that it was changed, but they don't remember from what to what. Like, it'll just kind of remind them about that topic, but they won't necessarily remember what the real information was. So the running of corrections that you had mentioned is what professional journalists will do for the sake of transparency, to be able to correct that. Part of the problem and the reason that things like that are happening is this rush to publish, right? And part of it is that social media presence, but also just kind of this 24-hour news cycle that we're in right now, that's from social media, but that's also from television, that we're publishing all the time and we're communicating all the time. So the amount of time that people have to double check and to fact check and to call 5 people to see and to, find a bunch of different sources to confirm is less than it has been in the past. What we're teaching and what we're encouraging is spend as much time doing that as you possibly can, despite the pressure to feel like you have to be the first one to write this story. Does that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's very much what we're trying to do. He's talking about a mechanism in place to prevent fake information or untrue or incomplete or out of context information from getting out. There are editing systems. There's a process by which a reporter writes article, double checks a bunch of information. It goes to an editor who is then double checking the information again. It goes to a higher level. Part of the issue in our current climate is that we are getting rid of some of those positions for different budgetary reasons, and newspapers in particular. We're getting rid of the people who were doing that, which is a big problem because that was part of the mechanism in place. But that mechanism of, editors, fact checkers, proofreaders, anybody else, any other glance that you can have on your article is there. The issue is, the difference is, in news compared to something else, is that you still want your readers to have as much information as they need as soon as you can. Like, there's still a benefit to, if there's something awful going on or if there's something great going on, we want our readers, we want society, we want people to know what's happening as close to when it's happening as possible. So sometimes that means providing the best information we can in the moment, and then kind of going back once we have more information.
Okay, that's actually time. We have to stop for now. You can talk with the panelists after this session. Please thank our panelists. And the next panel will start in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, you had written questions, right? Yeah. Thank you for coordinating that. There you go. Yes, I agree. I tweeted I always feel
I'm challenged. Tony. I'm the number 2 guy.
Okay.
So are you going to convert over to my presentation after the first?
I can if you need me to.
It might be helpful just so I know that's going to happen.
Yeah, it's actually up here. It's actually down here,
Okay.
open already. Close that one out. But I can come down and switch it over if you need me
If
to.
I look like I'm fumbling, let me know. And does this work?
It does. Yep.
Okay.
If you want to try it there, it'll.
Yeah, I don't. It's good to try it out. Yeah, I sort of like.
Oh, sorry, I closed you out there. My bad. You don't have to point at this. Oh, you're trying to laser? There's a stronger laser here.
Oh, good.
That works better on the wall if you want to.
Yes, that would be very helpful. Yeah, good.
And this is.
So it should be
back and forth
yeah,
here.
back and forth.
And then where's the?
This
the laser
apparently
pointer?
is the better laser.
Okay.
Yeah, the wall's a little bright, so the one on the presenter
Doesn't work very well.
Kind of washes things out.
Okay.
Just a reminder, we are recording today, so I ask that
Okay.
you either speak into the podium mic or use either the lavalier or one of the handhelds that we have.
Okay.
And on the recording, are you tracking us, or do we have to stay relatively?
If you want to walk around, I'll follow
I
you
might
or
a
just
little bit.
zoom out and do a wide shot.
You got time signals there? Okay, and where will you be? Okay.
Well, Anthony, have you met? Oh no.
No.
Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for being part of the panel.
Sure.
So you'll each have 10 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes of stuff. Yeah. And you can pursue and then throw one up.
The mics, the handheld and the lav are currently both turned off, so if you want to use the handheld, just flip that up.
Okay.
If you decide to use the lav, just flip this over to off.
Which way are you thinking of going?
Okay.
Or if you
you
both
know,
would like a lav, we do have a second lav over here.
Well, my only thinking is
Test.
I'm probably going to be walking, and I'm probably going to be using the remote
The
control
laser
and the.
pointer, laser pointer.
So I think I'll probably go with.
Okay. This one is off as well, so just remember to.
yeah, I might try this. You just clip it on.
Yep.
So let me just make sure it's
On your-
on. Got it.
Where do you turn it on?
On top right here. Just flip that, we'll switch over to on, and you're hot.
Okay, test.
And you control the volume at all, or just?
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
your mic will adjust up there based on your
Is
voice.
this a good spot for it, or should
Yeah.
it be low?
It should be.
Is that all right?
If you want to flip it on real quick and do a quick mic check
Yeah.
again while people are getting settled.
How's that doing? I don't hear anything.
Can you? Yeah. How do you know?
Okay. Still waiting, I think.
Test.
I can hear it.
You can? Okay.
You can hear it up
That's
there.
what matters.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be good to.
Well,
let
we
us
should
know.
be good enough for you'll adjust whatever we need.
Well.
Okay.
Okay. So what we'll do is
Then
we'll
I'll
probably
turn mine off so
turn
I
off.
start sounding like an
Yeah.
idiot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
That's that.
Great. And I
So where's the rest of your? I was expecting. I was gonna be outnumbered here with an army of. I guess they're all in Europe right now.
Yes, yeah, they are all in Europe. Yeah. So, and I'll probably do a bit of a lead-in for you. Oops. Because I give kind of that.
Okay, good.
A little bit of a background. So we'll
Well,
lead in
I'm
from there.
going to just sort of touch on a couple of points. I won't do the. I'm going to basically say we're going way beyond 2 degrees rise.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you want to talk about
Yep.
how we're getting there, that's great.
Test. Where's he at? All right. Let's see.
Ready?
Well, I guess. I don't know. We'll see.
Oh, you can stay standing.
Huh?
You can stay standing. Got started here. 3:15, 3:17. Okay.
It is?
Yeah.
All right. Oh, boy. Okay. Right.
Okay.
Ready.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for coming to Spotlight on Scholarship at Northern Kentucky University. I'm going to be the moderator for the next presentation, the next panel. My name is Brad McCombs. I'm Associate Professor in Visual Arts. And we have two panelists who are going to be exploring the challenges of climate change. We'll start off with Richard Durtsche, Professor in Biology, Biological Sciences. And he's going to be talking about discussing the metabolism in Atlantic salmon and brown trout and the likely effects of climate change. And then we have Anthony Chavez, professor on the Chase College of Law, incentivizing negative emission technologies. So each presenter will have 10 minutes to discuss and to present, and then we'll follow up with 10 minutes of questions. Thank you again for coming, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Hej och välkommen till min forskningstall. Jag hoppas att solgardinen skiner på mig. Now I've done part of my sabbatical research in Scandinavia, so I thought I'd throw a little Swedish in there to kick us off and get some blessings from the soul goddess. But it's on the effects of climate change and the impact on salmonid fish. If we look at climate change, we see that solar energy comes in with greenhouse gases that get reabsorbed and re-reflected to warm the Earth's climate. Currently, we're going up about 1 degree Celsius, which is about 1.78 degrees Fahrenheit. If we look at historically, the carbon dioxide, and we've got methane and nitrous oxide. If we look at gas deposits in Arctic or Antarctic ice, we see that it's been relatively low, and it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that we started to see this exponential growth. And currently it's being monitored on Mauna Loa in Hawaii, but it's gone up very quickly. Predictions, if we don't do anything, is that it could be up as high as 4 degrees Celsius within the next 100 years. But if we do some dramatic changes, we can stabilize it within 50 years. What we're seeing is between 86 and 2005, the beginning of regional transformation in global climate change. But models will predict that these really accentuate so that the northern temperate and Arctic polar regions have the greatest temperature change, with the least occurring in open oceans in the southern hemisphere. We see dramatic effects taking place right now with the decrease in Arctic ice that occurs, especially during the summer period, and a reduction in the snowfall that takes place in the northern portions of the northern hemisphere. And so that begs the question how that impacts some of the wildlife there. Well, salmonid fish, and here we've got Atlantic salmon and brown trout, have a life history pattern where they are in the ocean as adults, and then they migrate into streams and rivers to breed in the fall, and then their eggs are deposited and develop during this winter period where ice and snowfall can play a role in their development. Once they hatch in later spring, then they spend a couple of years in freshwater before migrating back to the ocean and being in the ocean for a year or two and then coming back. And these trout can actually make multiple excursions, so we call these anadromous trout or salmon as they move back and forth. So my question was, do we see changes in their physiological response to climate change? And one of the best ways to do that is to look at their metabolic rate. And so if you look at the difference between their minimum and maximum metabolic rate, we call that their aerobic scope. And Holt and Jorgensen in 2015 came up with some mathematical models to predict that climate change should really impact this aerobic scope. And so I wanted to look at that in the salmon and ask a few questions. One, do we see large changes as we move across different temperature ranges for the fish? If fish are raised at warmer temperatures, like under climate change conditions, does that really affect their climate their metabolic scope or their aerobic scope. And then lastly, if we have fish that are resident fish in streams and rivers or migratory, does that impact their change in their aerobic scope and standard metabolic rate, their minimum metabolic rate? So to test this, in Sweden I used Atlantic salmon, and we looked at metabolic rate. We started out by getting the eggs of the fish, and we raised them under 2 different temperature conditions, a normal cold temperature regime and then a climate change plus 2 to 3 degrees Celsius temperature range. And then when they became free-swimming fish, we raised them in similar water conditions, and then I tested them in these aquatic respirometry systems. Actually, they're IKEA spaghetti jars, but they worked really well for this. And I could use infrared sensors to determine dissolved oxygen consumption. And I could run, I could run about 8 fish at a time in a tank and measure their metabolic rate and then replenish their oxygen. We also did tests on brown trout in Norway where we added to the climate change difference of having either migratory or resident trout. And so we did some crosses to see how they responded to climate change. And so raised them under the same conditions, either elevated or normal water temperature, and then tested them as free-swimming fish. Here's the area in Norway. It's pretty nice. It was right off the fjord. And so we had water pumped in directly from the river where the fish would migrate into or out of as they'd be going up to breed. And then these were young-of-the-year fish, and so we could actually put them inside of the little respirometry chambers that measured their dissolved oxygen concentration. Now, when we did a metabolic range analysis, this is a 24-hour period, we essentially would have them respire and use up oxygen for a while, and then we'd recharge the oxygen. And then over this entire period, we take the lowest tenth to a third of those regressions of metabolic rate or oxygen consumption rates, and that would determine their minimum metabolic rate. And then at the end of the study, we would take the fish out, put them in a bucket or a bowl, and chase them around, get them exhausted, and put them back in the chamber, and then we'd measure their maximum metabolic rate, and then from that we could calculate their aerobic scope. Now here's the aerobic scope of the Atlantic salmon tested at 3 different degrees Celsius. We did not find any difference between the cold normal temperature species and the elevated climate change species. And we also did not see any of the changes that we might predict in terms of an arch changes that were predicted in the mathematical models. In looking at this more closely, just looking at their minimum metabolic rate, we see that at the 3 different temperatures, they did have higher metabolic rates. And then if we look at those salmon that were raised under climate change conditions, they all had higher metabolic rates, but not significantly so. So there's a trend, and we need a larger sample size. We also see, if we look just at the cold climate, the natural condition fish, they had more of the arch condition than what we see in the climate change fish when they were raised. Now, if we look at the metabolic rates of fish that are taken at these different climate change conditions or natural conditions under different breeding regimes for the brown trout, we see that we have significantly higher metabolic rates of brown trout that are crosses between anadromous or migrating trout and the resident trout versus straight matching up with migrating or resident trout under warm or cold conditions. So to give a summary then or conclusion of this study, we find that they definitely have an increase in their metabolic rate as they increase across a temperature range. We see that there's not the predicted change in aerobic scope like has been predicted for the cod. We do see trends for warmer salmon to have higher metabolic rates, but again, that has to be retested because we had a fairly low sample size. And we also see that a mixed combination of migratory and anadromous or migratory fish and resident fish under climate change conditions have a higher metabolic rate. We are in the process of continuing some more breeding trials. They're going to be rerunning some of these tests again. This was the first run on these salmon and trout, and so we'll have a larger sample size this time and can really explore that. One of the other things that we have noticed is that a higher metabolic rate has a potential of impacting the fish in terms of having them use up energy before they can acquire it. So it could cause starvation effects under climate change conditions, or it could cause the fish to migrate to northern streams that they wouldn't normally use to stay in that cooler habitat. It's been noted by one of my colleagues that warmer fish tend to lose their memory of which stream that they came out of. So if they're raised under, if they exist under climate change conditions, then they will not be able to remember which stream that they need to go back to breed. So I'd like to thank the affiliations and institutions that I've worked with, my funding sources, and both the student and faculty collaborators that I've had in this project. Thank you. That. Okay. Let me shut this off here.
Okay, I think I'm the last speaker of the day, so I will get you a little bit more depressed about climate change, and just when you're about ready to kill yourself, hopefully I'll be able to pull you back from the edge of the cliff and give you some positive solutions that may help minimize or reduce some of these problems. We'll talk about three things. First, sort of where are we right now with climate change and where does it look like we're going to be going? What are some approaches that can help reverse some of the carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere? And then what policies can we use that will help to promote some of these approaches and technologies? Scientists have generally presented as the dangerous climate change level a rise of 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial levels. Scientists generally are speaking in centigrade, so I'll be referring to the centigrade scale. At the 2 degree raise level, the dangerous climate change results could occur, which would include things like sea level rise, rising to such a level that many of the ocean cities along the ocean would be unlivable. Coral reefs would die out, problems like that. The other problem that happens at the 2 degree level is there would be climate change feedbacks which would accelerate the warming, which, for instance, probably an easy way to consider this is if the Arctic ice caps melted, instead of having the white ice reflecting sun back out into space, we'd end up with a dark blue ocean that only absorbs that much more heat. And so as a result, the warming would start to accelerate. So these are some of the problems that would occur if we get to that 2 degree level. Now to see where we're at. This is a projection of the likelihood of various increases in temperature occurring. The 2 degree level is here, which equates to about a 5% chance that we'll stay to a 2 degree warming level or less. Scientists say that this basically shows that warming is likely to be somewhere between a 2 and 4 degree level, with a middle level of being about 3 degrees. So right now, based upon our current track, we're projecting to about a 3 degree rise. As a result, we have to do something to avoid this, and one thing that we can do is implement what are negative emission technologies, which are basically a fancy way of saying carbon dioxide removal. Means to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and bury it underground, permanently removing it from the atmosphere. There are a number of different approaches that scientists are considering to accomplish this. One very familiar means to all of us is planting trees. They absorb the carbon and bury it underground. Sort of on the most technological side, what's called direct air capture, which are devices that basically blow air over materials that absorb carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide is then captured and processed and buried underground. A combination of these two, which may be very important to use, is biomass energy with carbon capture storage, but that's a fancy way of saying take trees, cut them down, burn them to generate electricity, take the emissions from those burning of trees to generate electricity, capture that, those emissions and bury it. So we know that burning trees to create electricity, that sort of sounds neutral because you're absorbing carbon. If you actually capture the emissions from that burning, then you would end up becoming negative. So, and then there's other approaches that are considered as well. The problem is that although we have these technologies, we haven't started building them out to scale, and the scale that would be required, let's see, is thousands, and to total of all of these technologies, to the extent that we've built them out, or there's only 50 of them. So we have significant more increase of them that's going to be required. Another reason why we need negative emission technologies are because even if we're able to, and this is looking at the electricity sector, even if we convert completely to wind power and solar electricity so that we're not putting up any greenhouse gases through electricity, we still have other sectors of the economy that we can't bring down to zero. There are some heavy industrial uses that need to burn fossil fuels, usually coal, metal processing facilities. Transport, airplanes, some ships are going to be pretty hard to bring down. We can't fly them on batteries, and some residential and commercial needs. So under the best of scenarios, we're still going to have some emissions, some greenhouse emissions that are going to be put into the air. So we need to compensate for that. And because the other thing, which I didn't include a slide of, is once carbon is into the air, it stays there for about 1,000 years. So wherever we finally stop emitting greenhouse gases, we're going to be living at that state of being for another 1,000 years. So scientists said we need to find a way to pull that carbon dioxide out and restore our atmosphere to the level that it had been previously. What I've looked at as a means to help sort of promote and develop these negative emission technologies are some of the approaches that have been used with regard to renewable energy, specifically and primarily the renewable portfolio standards and feed-in tariffs. The renewable portfolio standards you can look at as basically quantity regulation, saying you have to install X amount of something. It's an approach that was used primarily in the United States. What did I just do there? Primarily in the United States, 29 of the states use renewable portfolio standards, a number of other countries throughout the world. I keep hitting the wrong thing. There we go. A benefit of, or benefits of renewable portfolio standards is they set minimum levels, so they require the numbers of these negative emission technologies to increase over time, and they give long-term targets, which are what industries need or business owners need to make investments. They need to know that these industries are going to be around for a while. So that's, and this shows you historically in the United States how these have worked. These are sort of the targets, requirements of installations. And then if I had another slide here, it would show that the cost of these go down over time. As the costs are going down, then suddenly they become economical for those who are not under the renewable portfolio standard requirement to install renewable energy anyway, because it's become so cheap. So that's what an RPS does. Problems with it is it tends to favor the low-cost technology, and these floors tend to act as ceilings, and utilities don't install any more of them than is required. The second approach that has been used to promote renewable energy is what's called feed-in tariff, which renewable portfolio standards looked at quantity and said you need to install so much. Feed-in tariffs look at price and say we'll pay you X amount if you install these things. So there are three aspects to a feed-in tariff contract. First is it guarantees the payment, says if you produce it, we'll buy it. Not only will we buy it, we'll buy it at a particular rate, which is a rate that sets a profitable level. So if it costs you $5 to generate electricity from a source, we'll pay you $6. So you're guaranteed a profit, and you're guaranteed that profit for a long period of time. Feed-in tariffs have been so successful. 75% of global solar energy came from them. 45% of global wind installations came from feed-in tariffs. Benefits of a feed-in tariff approach is basically it removes risk to developers. They know that they'll be guaranteed a long-term profit. The problem, though, there's a catch as with everything. As one author wrote, the paradox inherent in feed-in tariffs is that they are designed to gradually self-destruct. That's a little bit of a problem, I think we can agree. What happens is because the rate for the contracts are at a premium level, over time the cost of the technology goes down, but utilities are still paying out these high levels of based upon the contracts. And so as a result, these high payments have to come from somewhere. They either come from, one, the ratepayers, or two, the utilities have to eat it. Utilities can't usually eat it long term, so what happens is they turn it over to the government, and taxpayers end up shouldering those costs. So as a result, several countries had to pull back from feed-in tariffs, and hit the wrong one again. I must have fat fingers today or something. So what happened is some of these countries had to basically repeal their feed-in tariffs. What I look at is a way to combine these with a third piece, which is auctions. Use our RPSs to set some minimum targets, which you ratchet up over time. At the initial stages, the feed-in tariffs can encourage investors to construct the new negative emission technologies because they know they'll be guaranteed a rate. But over time, you sort of ramp down the feed-in tariffs and you use auctions because those will agree to buy their services at the lowest cost available, so it helps to equalize the cost. And I probably better shut up because I think I'm out of time.
Okay, thank you again for coming. We've got about 10 minutes for discussion, questions. Any questions from the audience? Yes.
Oh, okay, well, let me start with this. Where did the carbon dioxide come from? Underground. And we can basically, there are geological areas where you can bury the carbon dioxide where it won't come out. Another thing, which this isn't involved, but I'm also looking at, is that what you can do is you can take that carbon dioxide and you can produce things with it. It can be used in construction materials. It can be used carbon, clothing, well, not material, but like Kevlar and stuff like that. So there, and carbon's used in carbonated drinks. And so there, but the problem is there's so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that right now it doesn't look like we can come up with enough uses to use it all up. So we're going to have excess carbon that we're going to have to do something with, which is probably burying it.
Do that, why do we not have the funds to do it?
Part of the problem is there's not really other than people out of their own goodwill, there's not a financial incentive to capture. It's going to cost money to run the machines that will capture the carbon dioxide, process it, and bury it. If we pass the carbon tax, which I don't know if any of you are in classes that talk about carbon taxes. That would put a value on carbon, and that would help make it profitable to do it. Short of doing something like that, then we need some sort of government subsidy or approach to at least get the processes rolling and start the flood of investment.
So our government isn't giving funds to it. Are there other governments, like around the world, that are contributing to that cause?
Europe is it's a different world in Europe on these issues rather than where we are. They don't have a carbon tax. I think there's 1 or 2 countries that are looking at carbon taxes, but they do have an emission trading system, which ends up putting a valuation on carbon. So that's a system that helps, would be translatable to something like this.
Currently, are there any carbon emissions being buried, and what is that technology?
Yeah, you can really love this answer. The technology of capturing the carbon and burying it is used, extensive would be the wrong way to say it, but is used in the oil industry because the carbon can be used to help extract oil that's otherwise hard to pull out. So so the technology is sort of known, but it's used so rarely that it's still really expensive. It's like solar was 20 years ago.
Do you have questions for one another?
Well, I was just going to ask, you had on your figure the bearing of the carbon dioxide, then you had pipes going out to the ocean. Anytime you dump carbon dioxide in the ocean, you're going to acidify the ocean.
Yeah, I don't think I know the slide and that you're talking about, if I can find it. I don't think it's intended to be burying carbon into the ocean. I see. A better drawing of that would be burying it underground underneath the ocean. But part also of what they may be talking about is ocean alkalinity approaches that raise the alkalinity. I'm sorry, I may screw this up, but that raise the alkalinity of the ocean, which helps to compensate for the increased carbon. Am I saying that right?
Yes, except your ocean alkalinity addition, which is CO2, that should be ocean acidity, because once carbon
reducing
dioxide
the
goes,
ocean acidity. Yeah.
No, increasing the ocean acidity. Once carbon dioxide goes into the ocean, it acidifies the ocean.
Right, but the ocean alkalinity compensates for the acidity.
No, it's becoming more with global climate change.
Yeah,
it's becoming more acidic.
but what I'm saying is that if you read. Let's actually talk about this afterwards because we're going to get a little too.
And we'll have one more question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the idea behind understanding whether or not they change metabolism is to give an idea of whether or not we need to try to do some work on planning for having, first of all, it's just understanding what's happening with the fish. Can we make predictions about what's going to happen to these natural populations? Are they going to be moving north, right? Should we be putting protections on them at more northern climates? Because if they shift to a more northern climate and you have commercial fishermen up there, maybe there has to be regulations put on how much fish are being taken from that as an applied aspect, right? This is pretty much basic research right here, just to try to get a handle on what's going on and predictively what might happen in the future.
Well, again, thank you everyone for coming. Spotlight on Scholarship will continue at 4 o'clock with the Corbett Trio performance and the presentation of the Spotlight on Scholarship Soul Award. So look forward to seeing you at that, which will be both here in the Digitorium and outside in the lobby. There also will be food and the Corbett Trio will continue, and we'll be going until what time? Till about 5, 4:35, yeah. Okay, thanks again.